Hello, thank you for joining us today. This is Casey Luck, one of the directors of membership for the Golden Crown Literary Society. I want to welcome you to the 2020 GCLS Virtual Conference, and the panel is Size Matters. For those of you new to the Golden Crown Literary Society, the GCLS recognizes and rewards quality literature and works about women who love women and provides learning opportunities, encouragement, and assistance to new and established writers. We have a highly respected writing academy, an annual gathering of hundreds of readers, writers, publishers, and editors, and a monthly GCLS members-only online book club. We invite you to learn more about the GCLS and perhaps become a member by visiting our website, goldencrown.org. The GCLS would like to thank everyone who continues to support us through donations. If you'd like to make a donation, please visit the website and click on Donate. Here are a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. We'll have about 5 to 10 minutes at the end of the session for Q&A. We'll try to get as many questions as we can. Feel free to use the Zoom Q&A box to submit a question. And if you run into technical issues, please just log off and log back in. This usually resolves most issues with Zoom. Okay, that does it for announcements. We hope that you enjoy the presentation. I'd like to turn the session over to our moderator, Rita Carver.
Hi, everyone. Casey, thank you so much. Welcome to Size Matters. Let me introduce you just a little bit to myself first. I am an author, but not the kind of used to meeting here. I am a textbook author. I am the author of Stagecraft Fundamentals, which is a theater textbook for backstage and technical theater. It's currently in its 3rd edition. I have become a sought-after speaker, lecturer, and writer. I am an Emmy Award winner for lighting design in the 2000 Sydney Olympics. I should have had my statue here so I could hold it and go, gosh, it's really heavy, but it is. My professional credits in lighting design include over 25 years of working in Broadway and regional theater, dance, and opera, both in the US and internationally. I've also worked in television, and those credits include Good Morning America, 2020, Primetime Live, Turning Point, the Democratic and the Republican national election coverage, New Year's Eve in Times Square, Discovery News, and ESPN Sports Century. And I hold an MFA in design, lighting design specifically from New York University. So enough about me. Now you've at least got an idea who's going to be pointing fingers and asking questions for the next 50 minutes. Let me now introduce you to our wonderful panelists. Let me start with Sean Marie Bryan. Thank you for waving. So in addition to being a multimedia professional, Sean is a writer of plays, memoirs, fiction, lists, letters, and copy. She hosts the A Woman About podcast, has an extensive background in theater, yay, broadcasting, libraries, radio, retail, and has been helping to bring audiobooks to life for over 2 decades. She lives in the desert with her wife and 2 cats. Sean, thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Our next panelist is E.A. Kafkalis. A novelist and playwright, she is the author of the novelist Donning the Beard, Out of Grief, The Second Heart, Soul Mistakes, and Frankie and Petra. And the plays Lopsided and Pandora's Golden Box. A Renaissance woman, she has worked in the theater as an actor, director, and a producer, as well as being a mixed media artist working with clays and acrylics. E.A., thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Cindy Rizzo is the author of 3 novels, Getting Back, Love is Enough, and Exception to the Rule, which won the 2014 Goldie for Best Debut Author. Congratulations. Her short stories have appeared in Unwrap These Presents, Conference Call, and Language of Love. Essay in Our Happy Hours, LGBT Voices from the Gay Bars. She recently completed a young adult speculative fiction novel called The Paper Cutter. Thank you, Cindy, for being here.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Joy Van Stralen. Welcome. Joy is the Writing Academy manager, a writer, and the person everyone calls when they're freaking out about their tech not working. Well, this is going to be good to have you with us. As a thin person with a fat partner, she sees the double standard of treatment on a daily basis. She is a proponent of fat representation in theater as an agent of change in regard to size discrimination. Thank you very much, Joy, for being here.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
And lastly, Cheryl Wright. Cheryl started right 10 years ago after suffering a medical misfortune. It's a term she learned from reading the lesbian fiction she loves to write and share. As a writer, she aims to bring characters to life while exploring the process of crafting adventures for readers and audiences devoted to the happily ever after story. Besides writing, she keeps honeybees, writes code, and is currently building an autonomous robot from urban scrap. Cheryl, thank you for being here as well.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Well, as you can see, we have a very diversified panel, so it's going to be quite an interesting conversation that we have today. So let me start by saying that the goal of our panel is not to explore a need for leading characters of psi, but to ask our panelists and later those of you who are attending how we can do this in a more positive light. Readers' interest to those characters. It's clear that our community has people of all sizes and shapes, so why not reflect them in our stories? There are buzzwords today like fat and plus size. Chubby, a personal favorite that I grew up with, is pleasantly plump. Of course, some people use Rubenesque, and then there's the medical term that most of us hate, which is obese. So how do we come to own some of these words, take them back from being insults? And that's a lot of what we're going to talk about today. How do we use these characters in positive ways in our stories? So our first question, and this is a question for all of my panelists here. Who among you have written characters who are heavy in your novels? Can I see a show of hands? In the EA. So I'd like to address the two of you first. How were those stories received? Cheryl, can I start with you? The stories that you've written that have heavy characters in them, how were those stories received?
It's hard to tell. The last book that was just released, Cause and Affection. My main character is short. She rose as an athlete, but you know, that gives you big thighs, and then she's settled a bit as an older, more mature woman. So I approached it as, you know, this is who she was, this not perfect, not anything, but this woman who was determined to do a job and make things happen for her company. And the characters around her, it's their reflection of how they believe she looks that I sort of drew on. So, you know, some make fun that she's short, or some make fun that she's fat, but the woman who's falling for her doesn't see any of those things. And so I wanted it to be the way we sort of experience our own relationships. My wife is amazing, and we've been married almost 25 years now, and she doesn't see it. When we met, I was a military officer, 120 pounds of muscle and nothing else. And, you know, our life has changed completely since the accident. But, you know, she looks at me and she just loves me to bits the same way. So I try to make it so that the reflection of my characters is what matters. And it's those nice things, those things, the positive things that we see about ourselves, or at least if we can't see it, our partners do. I hope that's helped.
That's great. EA, can you add your experience with the character in your book?
Yeah, I have Frankie and Petra. She's heavy. Petra doesn't isn't fazed by that at all. And Mary, in my short story, Mary's Angel, my thing is that my heavy characters usually, they think of themselves as heavy, but not everyone around them sees them that way. So that's not been my experience. You know, I've experienced both, being heavy, having lost 100 pounds. I can for sure tell you that people treat you completely differently when you're heavy. But I don't think that matters in a relationship. And if it does, then I don't think you're in the right relationship. And I've gotten kudos for it. So people like that it's not the, you know, same old, same old.
The story I have in the anthology conference call has a fat leading character or main character, one of the two. It's a little bit of a YA romance. And it actually is about size acceptance. The main character writes a blog under another name and is out about her size and writes a lot about that. And goes to the conference because she really wants to meet this woman who wrote a YA novel about a fat girl who doesn't try to lose weight. And then she finds out that the author, who she sort of idolized, really, you know, doesn't share that point of view. She just wrote a book to make money. So it's really about how that work, you know, how that changes her and how she aligns with some of the other young people at the conference to try to get the message across about this. And, you know, I think people liked it. I don't know, because it's in an anthology. It's not like the same kind of response you get if you write a standalone novel. But I did it specifically because I really wanted to explore that issue in fiction, and likely I'll do that again.
Sean, can I ask you, in terms of your characters, have you stayed away from characters of size on purpose, or it just hasn't come up in your storylines naturally?
Oh, I think maybe you missed me raising my hand.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I don't stay away from any size at all sizes. And
excellent. Tell us a little bit about your experience then.
Well, I write under a pen name to honor those who had to. And when I put all of the characters out there, I get the most like sort of appreciative response when there is a woman of a larger size or a different size than the typical. They're just so grateful to have any sort of representation. And I am, you know, I'm completely anti-shaming, so it's just a part of them. And it's just, you know, I include parts of how, you know, people of every size go through life differently. And so I make sure to include, you know, like those little parts that, you know, but just as they're there, they're just as a matter of fact, it's not a positive or a negative. And that's what I seem to get the most feedback from, that it's like, thank you, just for showing just like a little bit of real life without it being any kind of token or any kind of pandering. So it's always been very positive when I get the feedback from people who appreciate seeing people of size, of a larger size and also of a thinner size, without ridiculing or shaming them either.
Excellent. Joy, I'm going to rephrase the question a little for you, since you work with the Writing Academy. I'm sure that this comes up as you're dealing with younger writers or newer writers, not necessarily young in their craft is what I mean, regardless of their actual age. So the second half of this question is that, you know, a lot of times I think that when I'm picking up a book, the images that come to mind with less experienced writers is get of them pre-casting the film of their novel and going to like Hollywood actors in their head, and that's sort of how they envision. You're nodding yes, so that's
Yes.
sort of how I get it. Is that sort of a right image on a young
Yes.
writer?
And
So
a lot
then
of them have, sorry.
go ahead.
A lot of them have started their writing careers by writing fan fiction. So they already have an image, a Hollywood image of the characters that they're writing. So yeah, it's definitely, they're following that, what they see represented on television and movies and whatnot. And then in the fan fiction.
Is it difficult to try and expand their vision beyond those with the six-pack of abs and the gorgeous, voluptuous, yet zero body fat kind of, which I don't know how you do those two things, honestly, but somehow they do. Is that part of what the Writing Academy tries to help people to envision more realistic body types?
Yes, we do have a class that's featured or centered on diversity, and not just diversity by race, but also by size and capabilities and all the diversities that come in through regular life. So we do address that. We try to present it as it's not really sympathetic or empathetic writing, but we want to be as honest and accurate as possible as you can in writing that. If you're uncertain, reach out to somebody, either somebody you know or access there's a slew of people in GCLS that have opened themselves up to being contacted. Don't be afraid to contact those people, get to know them. We have the mentors as well. Talk to people, find out, get outside of your own little box and reach to other people. And so we do try to really focus on getting that diversity in there.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you all. Great answers and insight. I'm going to move on to the next question, and that is size subjective? Do we define what makes a person of size? Do we actually define what that means? Or do we portray characters in a way that the reader can insert themselves into that story? And does ethnicity play into that? I sort of add in that last caveat. I am Mediterranean, so for me, plus size isn't a thing, because I grew up in what I now realize was a family of plus size women, but we never believed that we were plus size. We just thought we were Sicilian, and that's how God made us. So there was no such thing as a size 0 in my family. We didn't believe that should ever be a thing. So is size subjective? Go ahead, Cheryl, take it away.
Yeah, I really wanted to talk about this at some point because it really is, and it really does come down to culture and ethnicity. So if you look at, for the people who are joining us and you see me, I'm sitting here in my Indigenous Canadian Veterans Association uniform because it's Indigenous Day, and we've been doing things today. And in our community, young women are slim because they're young women and they're running around and doing stuff. And matrons, I don't know if I can even express to you what it's like to be at a cultural gathering when the matrons come out and they march out to the beat of the big drum. And it's like their feet don't even move. There's just this little thing going on. And they all have these big capes on and they're just swinging with them. The beads are swinging with them. And it's like they're the most beautiful women in the world. And these are big, big, big ladies. And, most of them have grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And I think if I could be half as beautiful as those ladies in 10 or 20 years, then I think that's great. That's where we're going. So when I see a large woman and she's Indigenous, there's no plus size thing to me. She's just Indigenous. And we put on weight in the summer and lose it in the winter and all these other things. So that's just normal. And the same, you look around the Black community and I see some of the most gorgeous, gorgeous women who white people would call plus size. And it's this aggravating thing that Hollywood wants everybody to be a size 2 and white. And I look around at our own communities, I cannot express how beautiful big women are. And I'm not just saying that because I'm big now and my wife likes it. I'm saying it because it's maturity, it's life, it's everything they put on and carried, you know, and they've paid for every single inch. So why can't we honor that and love it and respect it? I think that's the thing that we miss. You know, like you said, bringing up in Sicily, no one would have looked at you and said, oh, your family's fat, right? But here, if you're Italian and living in Toronto, say, your kids are going to get shit on in school unless they're a size 8. And it's not right. I complain to my wife all the time that most people's opinions are fed to them by TV and movies, and it makes me sad. I don't know if any of that made sense.
Absolutely. Who else wants to take up this charge? Go ahead, Cindy.
I just wanted to say what Cheryl just said kind of made me think about this whole idea of Hollywood and the culture. And I think about people that came on the scene as famous people and were heavy. And then, you know, it was like, it always happened that at some point they lost the weight and then they were thin, and then they got all this like praise for it. Ricky Lake is one. We saw Adele also. And it's sad to me because these women were beautiful in the way that they were originally. And whatever pressures they were under from management and others, you know, made them go on these weight loss journeys. And I think that, you know, you see someone, a young actress like Beanie Feldstein, who is, you know, was great. She's a great actress, and she's getting a lot of recognition, and deservedly so. And it just makes me wonder, like, how long will it be before that happens to her? So hopefully maybe she's in a generation where she won't feel that pressure and conform in that way. But it's difficult. These are the messages that all women, especially women, get in the culture. And even if you come from a culture where there's acceptance, if you're in this sort of society, a lot of that overrides what you may have learned in your family or in your extended family. So these are very hard things. And it, of course, it spills into our literature, and what's idealized is what gets repeated. And, you know, so then you get these books that don't really resemble the people who we really are.
Go ahead, Sean.
So I wanted to touch on size being subjective and a good portion of it being perception. I walk through life either ridiculed and shamed or completely invisible. And, you know, it was a you know, a tough balance to find confidence in yourself when you don't see yourself anywhere, or you're constantly being told you're bad. And then, you know, you can have the flip experience from a completely different place and culture. I went to visit a friend in Atlanta, and we were on the metro, and there was a fella that got on, and he followed us all the way out into the burbs, and we got out and we were walking towards her house, and he came out, he was walking behind us, and he tapped me on the shoulder and he said, I'm sorry. I don't know where I am. I got on the metro because you are the most beautiful woman in Atlanta. And that would have never happened to me in my hometown culture or my hometown surroundings. So, I mean, first of all, you all should know I'm the most beautiful woman in Atlanta. It's very important. And just that little boost and that awareness that different cultures and different people and different walks of life take it all in differently. And if I were just listening to what the US medical doctors say, I'd be dead by now. So it's all subjective. And I think the attempt of, you know, squashing that and trying to show so much more representation just naturally and organically is a really good first step.
Great. EA?
So so I've usually went through my life being very heavy. then I got cancer and made some changes. But when I was married and my wife left me, I dropped 50 pounds in less than 2 months. I was devastated. I was beside myself. And people had the audacity to tell me that I looked good when I was miserable because I was thinner. So somewhere there's a disconnect, and I think like it is part of Hollywood. I mean, Rizzoli and Isles gay baiting aside, nobody's gonna make a story about a short, frumpy Boston detective and a goth ME, even though that would be fascinating. Instead, we're gonna, cast the tall, skinny white girls that, appeal to everyone. So I think like we're missing out on opportunities, not just to be honest, but to see people presented in a better light and more honestly, rather than the same old, same old.
I agree. Can I say something?
Go ahead, Sharon.
It's the media portrayal. You can look at some great producers like Shonda Rhimes and you see women of all kinds, all colors, all sizes, whatever. And then you get into other productions and it's just like, why does it have to be like the skinny white girl who has to be rescued by some guy? And I never understand it. But I was thinking about what EA said about being losing the weight and people thinking that was great. And I remember coming out of the hospital after this big ordeal, after 4 months in hospital, and finally get to see a few friends. And I had lost, I was only 120, so I was a skeleton, I was 100 pounds. And everybody's like, oh, you look great. And it's like, oh, you've lost weight. And it's like, what? I didn't have any to lose to begin with. So what is your problem? And now they just sort of look at me like, well, oh, well, it's too bad you couldn't keep it off.
It is a frustrating situation now. Let me go to Joy because she hasn't had a chance to speak. Go ahead, Joy.
I just wanted to comment on what EA had said about Rizzoli and Isles, which is your tall, slender police officer and or police detective and ME. And when you were mentioning it, I immediately thought of Cagney and Lacey, and Cagney and Lacey was really popular when I was a girl, and they didn't fit this stereotype that we have today. So something has changed in the last 20 or 30 years that has shrunk the size of women, because Cagney and Lacey weren't 118 pounds each. They were women that we know. They resembled our mothers, or women that we saw, our teachers in school. So something has changed. Let's bring it back to where it's not such a rigid portrayal of what beauty is supposed to be. And then I was reading in the comments, I hope you don't mind, but Mercedes made a mention when, I think, Cindy, when you were talking about Adele losing weight, and so I've got two comments of that. Ladies mentioned that either they get this great approval because they lost weight, because great for them and they achieved something, or they ended up like Karen Carpenter. And I wrote about 6 months ago, I think, on Facebook, I asked my ignorance, because when I wasn't too terribly young, and I can't remember how old I was when Karen Carpenter died from anorexia.
Joy,
Oh, sorry?
Joy,
Yes?
your microphone is cutting out. I'm going to give your internet just a second to catch back up again. So hang on 1 second. Somebody did comment that Sharon Glass replaced Meg Foster because Meg was too butch.
Wow.
So there was a little bit of that, but not quite the craziness that there is today. The other thing I'd just like to point out in our conversation is we are focusing on women of size, but this large size. Let us not forget that there are women who are plagued. I've never had this issue, but I do have friends that are very thin and cannot put on weight, and they have the exact similar problems that women that are large have in terms of people going, oh, well, if she could just eat something, then she'd be fine. And she's just trying to be thin and she doesn't eat anything. And she's eating a ton of good, nutritious food, and she's eating weight gaining supplements, and her metabolism is just so fast that she can't put on food, and she needs that size 0 that I don't understand. Or she needs to just, somebody who needs to just take off 10 pounds, and that is a realistic trial for that person. You know, I may want to lose 30 pounds, and that person's 10 is as much of a monumental issue as somebody wanting to lose 50 or 100 pounds. So I think the most important thing that I can impress upon everyone who's watching this is that everybody is real, and that if we can open up our minds and our hearts to anyone who is struggling with any kind of a physical issue, whether it's a disability or a weight issue, that we really, for whatever reasons, that we just don't judge them. Let me try, Cindy, I will get to you. Hang on, I want to try and use Joy again, see if her mic is better. Joy, do you want to try and finish your comment?
I can concede. Yeah, it can go
Okay,
back to Cindy.
Oh, sure. I think, you know, I agree with what you just said, Rita. I think it is also difficult if you are someone who is fat or heavy and you have a thin friend and your thin friend is saying all the time how much she has to lose weight. I think that is a very difficult thing to be standing there, being in your own body and hear that. And that's just about a societal pressure. So I think you know, both things are, there's kind of multiple truths in this situation that people go through. But, and I also wanted to say, I want us to get to talk about books, but the last thing I want to say about health is about health. And I understand there are health realities for some people. We have friends that, you know, although both of us are not big fans of weight loss surgery, we have friends who've had it, and the reason they've had it were very, very important health reasons that we understand. The surgery is very dangerous for a lot of people, you know, but if you have other health dangers that supersede that, then that might be something that people have to do. That said, there's a lot of women who are heavy, who are, you know, plus size, whatever you want to call it, who are in great health, who don't have issues around, you know, cholesterol or high blood pressure or diabetes or any of those things, and who eat healthy, who exercise, but this is their body. So I think health can go both ways. It's not always an indicator of whether you need to lose weight. Sometimes it can be, but to use it constantly for women who are heavy and say you'd be healthier if, you know, is probably more about the lack of fat acceptance than it is about concern for someone's health.
Absolutely. Let's move on to my next question so that we can figure out the best way to try and help the industry and help the authors that are here and the authors that are listening, and also figure out the best way that the readers who are listening can know what to expect, and hopefully maybe educate their expectations a little. So next question is, going back to those buzzwords that I talked about in the beginning, do we think that we can own some of those words, or do we think that they are too weaponized? Plus size, chubby, pleasantly plump, Rubenesque, obese. Should we take some of those off the table? How do we, I mean, some of them, it depends on how you use them. And I totally understand that. Some of it is inflection when you're speaking. Some of it is a written inflection in terms of how a character uses that word. So can we speak to that so that we know better how to describe a character of size, so that readers especially will know how you're going to best, I guess, describe a character in the beginning when you're first establishing a character. What words might you want to use to describe someone? Or how might you have described a character? EA.
I grew up with pleasingly plump too. It's kind of insulting to me because it was always said with such a tone. Like, I think it all matters about how you perceive things. Like, as an artist, I find the word Rubenesque quite pleasing because it makes me think of all these wonderful paintings and that. So I don't find that bad. I know there's a big push to reclaim the word fat, but for me, also like pleasingly plump, that was never said in a pleasant tone. So I think it's all about how you write it and portray it and the reader perceives it. And you're never, I mean, there are words like obese that we shouldn't be using, obviously, but I think it's more about picking out those words because, you know, there's a big debate over panties and moist, and those might not offend every person that reads, but, you know, there's big hoo-ha in the community about them. So I think it's more about not using certain words, like not using obese, not using, I don't know. I think pleasingly plump can be condescending in a way, but again, that's how it was used when people referred to me when I was little. So that could just be my own baggage. Somebody else can jump in here.
Is there anybody that wants to share how they described it? Go ahead, Joy.
I just asked my wife and she said fat is perfectly fine with her. So that's what I'm going to go with. I think that along with obese, being horrid, morbidly obese is just vile because it's basically saying the way you look is death. And I think that's absolutely vile.
I would agree. Sean Marie.
Sorry, I couldn't find my button. Yeah, I think the reclaiming is so hard. Like we tried to reclaim cunt, we tried to reclaim queer, and it gets so many mixed messages. And so I think maybe, you know, just owning it, like, and using words, but not in bad ways. And also maybe, you know, when you are writing and you're describing something, like say your characters are having sex, you can describe how lovely it is to feel the softness of something, you know, or, you know, so like you can write about how someone is without dictating that that's exactly how they are. And therefore you can kind of, you know, bypass any possible triggers or condescending words.
Yeah,
Oh,
I
Cindy,
think
sorry.
I just wanted to say that, you know, a lot of the words you use really depends on the story and the character and the point you're trying to make, you know, like anything else in any descriptions you use for any characters. So in my short story and conference call, I would use the word fat because my character is all about fat acceptance. Somebody else who might have very, you know, mixed feelings or negative feelings about their body might say other words or want people to use other words or be offended by some words. It really depends on the point you're trying to make in including that character in there and the people's reactions to her. And you know, there are words like curvy, which I like, but I never know when I read that in a book, like what that means. Like, how big is curvy? Is it just not skinny? Is it, you know, not athletic? So I never know if I'm reading about a fat character or if I'm just reading about somebody who is, you know, whose body shape is not like this. So anyway.
And somebody just commented that curvy is a very empowering word for them. So that's great. And skinny, a lot of thin people take offense at. So Cheryl, go ahead.
I wanted to say that words like sensual one of my characters uses describing in Don't Let Go, and George is a veteran with a serious head injury, and when she finally and her girlfriend get together, she's a voluptuous woman, but she's also a warrior and strong and all these things. So she sees her as a strong woman who has potential to, or is trying desperately to learn to communicate. And but the words as a couple become very different. Instead of curvy, it's sensuous. It becomes part of just how they feel. And someone noted here, I think I've missed it now, maybe Elaine, talking about she wants to see it in the action of the character. And that's pretty much how I do it. If you think she's fat, judging by her actions, or you think she's skinny or whatever, it's really how you've interpreted it. And that's how I want people to interpret everything around them. Find their own interpretations and find a way to be positive about everything we see. Hopefully that helps.
Okay, let's move on to another question. This involves sort of market data, but not in like a numbers sort of way. For those of you that have publishers, or if you are self-publishing, then address it for yourself. Do you ever feel like the market data is more about being young, beautiful characters, and that's what people want? When you look at competing books that may or may not be winning awards, not Goldies, I'm not dissing anybody, I'm just looking at competing books that are maybe in bookstores that are not lesfic, but on the covers you're not seeing people of size represented. I never see anyone who looks like me, cool glasses like I have, on a cover book. So do you ever feel that you need to, I'll get to you, Yay. Do you ever feel like you need to conform to somebody else's version of what is the norm? EA, go.
No.
Good.
I don't, but I think this is, I think it's more like a question for the audience too, and they seem to be participating here on the chat. So I would throw it out to them. I mean, are you looking to read books about characters that more reflect the people that you see in the everyday world, or are you looking to escape? You know, just read a bodice ripper, so that, whatever you want to call it, you know, a romance that you want to escape and pretend that you're have six-pack abs, or you got a Marilyn Monroe body or whatever. So that's what I think we should ask them, what they want to read.
Okay, well, you've been challenged. Let's see it in the chat. What do you guys think? Cindy, go ahead.
Yeah, I last year, 2 years ago, I can't remember, I think it was 2 years ago, I was on a panel at GCLS called All the Beautiful Women, and one of my co-panelists said that her publisher's market data showed that, you know, those books that have women who are the sort of ideal thin, probably 20s, 30s age, are the ones that sell the most. And so, and that was a pushback to me, because I had actually written to Harper Bliss before that panel and asked her about the book Everything Between Us, which has a fat character in it, a book I really liked. And I asked her, you know, did the book do well? How, you know, because it was outside what she normally wrote in terms of her characters. And she said it was one of the most popular books she had written. So I took that to the panel and said, look, you know, here's an author that has a lot of books, and she's an indie, and this is what she found. But then the person who was with the publisher said that they had data that showed that that wasn't, you know, that wasn't the case. So it's hard to know. I think that that's in adult romance, adult contemporary romance, that's one genre where this is a big problem, a big issue. But if you move into YA or some of the other genres, you see much more diversity in characters and much more diversity in issues that characters are dealing with than you do in romance. And that might be because romance is more of an escape. But I just see much more racial diversity in YA because I read a lot of YA because that's what I'm writing now, and much other kinds of diversity in YA than I'm seeing. And I don't know, for people who read a lot of sci-fi or spec fic or fantasy, it would be interesting to hear from you about that as well, about whether you see much more diversity in those genres.
Okay. We only have about 5 minutes left before we start doing the Q&A, and I've got one more question that I'm dying to get some feedback on. And that is that a lot of times it seems like we've gotten away a little bit from the heavy person being the sidekick, comic relief, best friend, next door neighbor. And now it seems like the heavy person often lands in the role of the evil antagonist, which just seems like a step from the quirky, fun sidekick. Okay, Cheryl, I see.
I never make the fat person the bad guy. I always find some guy, pin it on him. And we got enough problems with the world. So let's just stick together and make the guy the bad guy, and make that the antagonist, and, and let all the women work it out. That's in our community. It's all run by matrons. So, it works for me.
Okay. What do you think have you read books where a heavy person or a person of size was the villain?
No, actually, I haven't come across that. I see it ends up being the sidekick often, the best friend who can't get a girl and stuff like that. And that's always, I don't really understand that, but we all create our characters differently.
Go ahead, Sean Marie.
So I more so see an action being the villain that I would love to just erase from all. It's always like the person that's done them wrong or that is harming them or is bothering them or they're so annoyed by, it's because they're sweaty. And that's meant to mean that they're fat. Everybody has sweat glands and they're all genetic. So thin people can sweat just as much. But I often see that, and it's typically, that's the bad guy because they're sweating and it's inferred that they're fat. And that saddens me. I do, however, find some positive ones in some more mainstream and yet still queer representational in like memoirs of Lindy West, stories and nonfiction from Roxane Gay. So we're getting more and more, it's mainstream seems to be embracing larger women a tiny bit more than I see in lesfic as a broader, more easily acceptable part.
Okay, anyone else on that topic? Okay, one quick last thing. If we were going to look at movies, TV, books, even though we're specializing on books here, and any kind of books, not just lesfic, is there a medium or a genre where size matters the least? Who would you say is out in front on this topic? Who's dealing with it the best? Cheryl?
I mentioned it before, it's Shonda Rhimes. Anything she produces, you're going to get the golden girl up front, but the cast of characters always includes real women with real situations. When we have women producers and directors,
as opposed to specific to TV.
Yeah, so that's TV. So when you see that, and that makes a difference. Having good female directors and producers, whether in TV or movies, is the starting point. It's where we make things change. But we have to see more of women doing those jobs and getting those jobs and keeping those jobs. that so they can make those differences.
Okay. Sean Marie?
Genre it's right in line with that. It's urban fiction, which is kind of insulting that they call it that, but a little more Black literature. And they will absolutely focus on very positive women of size characters.
Okay.
And I just add that it's the same with Indigenous material. If you want to read any of the big authors from Thomas King on up, women of size are just a natural thing because in the Aboriginal community, as we discussed earlier, that's just a normal progression.
Okay, anyone else? Okay, we are at 10:05, so we are now supposed to go to the Q&A. If my panelists could open the Q&A tab, which would help me a little bit to facilitate things. Sean Marie, you have a question that you could type an answer to because it isn't really for everyone. Someone's asking for your pen name because they want your work. Okay, so Lainey Weber asked, do the panelists think that mainstream media is changing at all in its depiction of more real women? So I think that we have dealt with that a bit, and we are all in love with Chandra. We should just accept that and write her letters and offer her, you know, whatever it is that she wants, right? I mean, because she needs to just keep doing what she's doing, and we will bow down at her feet, and yeah. Okay, so then Lynn said, let's see, she read for total enjoyment. Okay, so this is not a Q&A. Let's see, do you think this is Cynthia Spur, do you think the diversity in YA will flow into adult fiction at some point as the YA readers get older? Yeah. I'm thinking so. Cindy, why don't you talk a little bit about that since you were the YA comments for a major part of this?
Yeah, well, you know, one can only hope that generations that are reading YA now will take that, you know, what they saw in those books and want them in books that they read when they're adults. And I think that YA has really been you know, has expanded as a genre. Certainly queer YA has, and that spilled into graphic novels and so on. And hopefully, you know, the diversity we see in those will filter into adult fiction. But I'd like to see that filter into romance. That's my my one place that it would be great to see that change.
Okay, anyone else for the YA question? I think it'll also be interesting to see as the generation moves from YA into adult lesbian, what they bring with them in terms of their preferences. Because it is truly a different generation that is growing up with a different set of preferences. So hopefully they will be more open about size and, God willing, race and a number of other things as they are fighting for those things even as we speak. Okay, Kate, I'm gonna massacre it. Wisman Vestman is asking if the Writing Academy is full for 2020, 2021. Joy, can you address that, or is it still accepting applications?
We are still accepting applications.
Okay, so so Kate, yes, you can totally still submit an application to that. She had another question, not about that, but she wanted to know if the lesbian publishers were pressuring writers to write white, thin, fit, able characters, but we don't have a publisher on the panel, so we don't really have an answer to that. Are any of my writers represented by one of the, Cheryl, who publishes you?
Bella Books.
Okay, and I mean, we're not trying to diss anybody, but are they fully embracing of whatever you give to them for the.
Absolutely. I have never, other than, give us a few more action words to describe this person, because we're not really sure what she looks like. That would be it. I've never been told that, carve this one down or fatten this one up or anything. It's just like, these are who the characters I create, and they're of different colors and different ethnicities, different cultures, and different sizes. And that's, my publisher is just cool.
Okay.
Jay mentioned in the comments that Ilva doesn't do that either. And I do a book with them. One of my books is with them, and that I didn't get any kind of directions about the character size from them. So I think, Jay, who's the senior editor there, would know best. So I think that that's, very true there as well. And Paula Martinek says Bywater. She hasn't seen that from Bywater.
Okay. Is there any other comment? I think, being fully inclusive is obviously the goal of everything. We're not about shaming, and the key is if you want to make the man the villain, just don't make the man a villain because he's fat, right? Like, we don't want to be shaming him because he's fat. We're okay shaming him because he's a man, right?
Yeah.
Cheryl, you raised your hand.
Yeah, I only pick on men that are in the family. That way it's, it's fair. And,
Oh, I like that. That's good.
Yeah. So I think it really comes down to, with writers, our own perception of community, of what we think, because we're writing our ideas when we create these characters. So if we're the ones who think we should be skinny and we're not fitting in, then we're going to write the wrong kind of characters. But when you look at this group, and we're, what did we decide? It wasn't more mature, just more that we've had enough life experience to know that people are different, and each difference is special, and we can honor that. And if we do that, we create great books.
Okay. I think
there's one word, I just wanted to say this because it bothers me in lesbian fiction. We were talking about words, what kind of words would you describe? But on the other end of the spectrum, the word that always gets me is toned. And that is almost in every book I read. And it's a signal for thin. I mean, it means somebody went to the gym and they have a great body and there's no fat on it and everything. So I just wanted to put that in there because it's one of those, ubiquitous words.
Right after we said that somebody really liked curvy, somebody else commented that curvy to them meant they had big hips and they didn't like curvy. So I think we have to acknowledge that we all bring baggage to these words, and pleasantly plump was a buzzword for me when I was young, and my mother did a lot of sewing when I was young, and she used to say that I was a size 12 with thin seams, which basically meant I was a 14, but she didn't want to admit it. So she would just make the seams thinner and thinner, so she didn't have to use a bigger pattern. So everybody has different buzzwords that have different baggage to them. And I think as long as we don't shame and we treat each other with respect, I think that would be the key. Oh, and somebody just said, you can look toned if you're an 18 or a 20. So again, it's how you can smile, Cindy. It's okay. We can look toned at 18 or 20. It's just a matter of how you perceive toned, right? It's maybe, I always joke that I have a six-pack. It's just hidden. It's in a cooler. It's hidden by everything. But we only have a minute left. I'd like to actually read a couple of comments, actually by Ellen Simpson, that was called Changing Expectations. And it says, caught in this feedback loop, queer genre fiction authors, readers, and publishers need to look at this tension. Change should come from within, as the reality of meta tagging for search engines is inescapable. Change should come from the publishers and writers who dare to create stories that do not fit the assumptions of what it means to tell a lesbian story, a story about queer women. She's talking about the meta tags where you would say, oh, it's a happy ending, it's fat women, it's voluptuous women, okay? So we have to be careful in how we need to challenge in our readers' minds that say stories in this genre can only be this way. We need to push past the understanding of the lesbian novel as a singular experience where there is only one cookie-cutter story that's told over and over again. Readers need to not reject a story because the lead happens to be bi or pansexual rather than a lesbian. They need to not reject the story because they're heavy or super thin as opposed to in the middle or any extreme. Readers need to not expect steamy sex scenes just because the story is labeled lesbian. Authors need to not be afraid to tell stories that break the rules of the genre. Our voices are unique and strong, and it is only if we decide to challenge this notion together that we can change the realities of the genre. When I read this the other night as I was preparing to moderate, I realized that that spoke volumes about not shaming people because of their size. So I wanted to end with that. Thank you also very much for being on this panel. Thank you to everyone who has been listening. This has been an awesome experience.
Thank you, Rita, for the great moderation.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you to the panel. Thank you, panel, and thank you, attendees. This is GCLS saying this has been a great session, and I appreciate all the input on the chat. That has been fantastic. Want to let you know that next weekend we have more coming to you virtually to the virtual conference, so check the schedule. It starts on Friday evening, I believe. Yes, and there'll be a master classes and some more panels, so the fun keeps going. And also, if you go to our website, you can see that there's author readings becoming available. So again, we're at goldencrown.org. That's it. I'm going to close this down. Thank you again, everybody.
Thank you,
Bye,
everyone.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.